Hello, everyone. My name is Russell, and this is the Fallout from Dishonor podcast. And this is your review for Ring of Honor's Death Before Dishonor pay per view. Before we get into all of that, all the excitement of the pay per view and such, I am running a contest on my YouTube channel. Now, wherever you're listening to this, Apple Music, Podbean, Spotify, wherever, go into the description. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link in there. It'll take you directly to a video Skype call interview that I did with a gentleman by the name of Adam Hayes. He is known in the wrestling circles as the Wrestling Geek. Really interesting guy. The audio kind of drops in and out for the first few minutes, unfortunately. It's a Skype call. There's not much that I could do about that. But after a few minutes, it does start to clear up and everything gets a little bit clearer. I definitely encourage you to go watch that in its entirety. It's less than 30 minutes. But the contest that I'm running, so you'll go to that and then go into the comments section and just go ahead and leave a question that I can answer on the podcast. Wrestling related, obviously. Anything. It doesn't matter what company, what subject. I don't care. Just something that I can answer on the podcast. I would love for you guys to get a little bit more interactive with the podcast. For that matter, a Fallout from Dishonor at yahoo.com. Go ahead and email me. Even after the contest is over, you can email any questions you might have for the podcast, or you can DM me on Twitter. Doesn't really matter. I'd love either one just to get some audience interaction going on here. All right, so the show itself. So the Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view itself took place September 12th, 2021 from the 2300 Arena in Philadelphia. Originally was scheduled to take place in an arena down in Florida. The name escapes me. I don't have it in my notes. But due to the ongoing pandemic and just what's going on down in Florida, they had to move it. Seems like every single show they've done in recent memory, I think, that's had people in it, has ended up being in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. I think Best in the World, both Glory by Honor, and this were all in Philadelphia. At the ECW Arena, no less. One of these days, I'm going to have to visit there. I live in Oregon, so that's going to be kind of a trip. Anyway, the show itself. So you guys may or may not have watched the first hour. Ring of Honor brands the beginning of their pay-per-views a little bit different. Everyone else has, quote-unquote, a pre-show. They brand it as just giving away the first hour of the pay-per-view. It is a pre-show, but this one in particular... So a normal pre-show, you might get one or two matches in, and then you'll get promos for the matches filtered in and out. It's basically like an ad for the pay-per-view. That's not really what this was. So as far as the 15-man Battle Royal is concerned, it started out with hometown boy Brian Johnson coming out, who is always entertaining, especially when he's cutting a promo on the mic. He basically cut a scathing promo on anyone that wasn't from the town of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's a little strange seeing him get cheered. Maybe I shouldn't say that because we've only ever seen him get cheered, at least in the last few months, because we haven't had a live crowd except for these special shows, as far as Ring of Honor goes. I imagine what's going on here is going to be really similar to what we get when MJF and AEW are in New York here in a few weeks. That, albeit on a much larger scale. But the Battle Royal was decent. I can run down list of names that were in it. Obviously, it started out with Brian Johnson, the Bouncers, Brian and the Beer City Bruiser were in it. Danhausen, commentary extraordinaire Caprice Coleman was actually in it too. Sledge, PCO, PJ Black, Dak Draper, Silas Young, Ray Horace, a couple guys from the dojo, Dante and Joe Keys, Flip Gordon, a very fucked up in the head Flip Gordon that thought it was 2018 and he was still in the Bullet Club. Actually, on that note, I believe it was the two guys that were in the dojo that he thought were the Young Bucks. So if you want to get kind of a laugh, I suggest that you watch this. You can go on Ring of Honor's YouTube channel and watch the first hour for free without buying the pay-per-view or going on the what's that fucking thing that I've got a membership to? Honor Club. Yeah. Anyway, world famous cheeseburger, and then we were actually surprised. A few minutes into the Battle Royal, it was announced that this was going to end up being a 16-man Battle Royal, not a 15-man. So the final member ended up being Alex Zane. I'm not going to go over everything that went on here point for point. In fact, actually, might as well get this out of the way. The way I'm covering this is a little bit different in some ways than I have in the past. I've tried to get it as move for move, hold for hold as I can. That's kind of put a limit on me enjoying the pay-per-views and the shows themselves. So the notes might not be as detailed as they have been in the past. Anyway, so the stuff that I enjoyed in this Battle Royal, the interaction between Danhausen, PCO, Sledge, I thought that stuff was very entertaining. I just love Danhausen. You guys already know that. PCO went nuts, eliminated himself after some conflict between him, Danhausen, and Sledge. Brian Johnson ended up eliminating Danhausen, and I gotta be honest with you, after that, I kind of stopped caring about this. It was decent. I would definitely recommend you guys go back and give it a watch, but basically Alex Zane ended up winning, so he will be getting a future Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Championship match. They did mention, I believe, that it is going to be on ROH TV, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm sure it'll come up here shortly. Well, maybe not. They still have Vincent that they got to give a Ring of Honor World Championship match to. So I don't know if they're going to give him the shot first or give Alex Zane his shot. The next match was Dalton Castle versus Eli Olsen. Dax Draper joined him on commentary after participating in the Battle Royal. Battle of Honor? I don't remember what they called it. Castle's entrance was very entertaining. Crowd seemed very behind him, which is not that surprising. I know he's been playing the heel for a long time now, but I think people are just entertained by him, like watching him. Castle and Olsen at the beginning traded chops, fists. Castle ended up eating a kick that took him to the outside, and Olsen hit a dive. Dax would eventually end up coming down to chat with the quote-unquote chicks, the dressed up four guys that follow Castle to the ring. Dax would end up, towards the end, trying to interfere very poorly, I might add. He never actually connected with anything on Eli Olsen, which probably for the better. Castle didn't end up getting disqualified. Castle would eventually hit his bangarang finish for the win. I gotta say, with Castle, I'm a little surprised. In the last few months, I don't think I've actually seen him lose a match. The following match was Jake Atlas and Taylor Russ. A little history lesson before I get into this. You guys probably already know, if you're listening to this, that a few weeks ago they started teasing a Mystery Man versus Mystery Man match, and it was leaked, I think, pretty much around the time that they started advertising that it would be two people that were recently released from WWE. No real indication as to who they would be other than that. I know a couple months ago it was leaked that Ring of Honor had been negotiating with some of the females that had been released by WWE, so I was thinking it might end up being them, but, well, one of the females. One or two of the females. That's not what we ended up getting. Again, Jake Atlas and Taylor or Tyler Rust. I got to admit, I wasn't overly thrilled about the idea. I want to run down why that was. A little history lesson. Jake Atlas signed with NXT 2019. Had his debut on April 1st, 2020, where he lost to Dexter Lumis. He was a participant in the interim Cruiserweight title tournament. He beat Drake Maverick and Tony Nese, lose to Kushida, and then end up losing the triple threat final to Maverick. He'd end up making his debut on 205 Live on July 19th in a winning effort, thankfully. And then he feuded with, and always lost to, I might add, Cruiserweight champion Santos Escobar. Him and Isaiah Swerve Scott would team up to participate in the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, which was won by MSK. Moving on to Tyler Rust. He debuted for NXT on December 2nd of last year and was in the Diamond Mine. That's pretty much it. You've got an ex-Diamond Mine guy and a guy that his name was only really in the news when he got released, and there was some controversy with Pride Month because he is an openly gay male, that maybe WWE were only giving him wins on TV because he was gay. I'm not saying anything about either man. They're both decent athletes. It's just, it was hard to get hyped up for this based on everything that WWE had or hadn't done with them. All that said, Taylor Rust would end up winning via submission. There were a couple spots in this match that were a little concerning for me. I'm a bit concerned about Jake Atlas. I'm wondering if his arm is okay because of a stomp spot that Rust did to it, and then he took a pretty rough-looking eat defeat and did not look right after that. So hopefully he's doing all right. Following match was Homicide, Chris Dickinson, Tony Deppen versus Josh Walter, LSG, and Lee Moriarty. A little note as far as this goes, Lee Moriarty has signed with AEW. Now, the reason I bring that up is because the announcers themselves actually brought that subject up and brought AEW up by name, and for that matter, actually had brought up WWE and NXT by name. It's a little refreshing to see a company be willing to acknowledge outside companies and where they came from. It seems like with AEW and WWE, they acknowledge that their guys, if they've got accolades that they want to mention, they'll mention that they've been world champions somewhere else or tag team champions somewhere else, had success somewhere else. They won't mention companies by name generally. They'll just mention the fact that they held gold somewhere else. So it was a little refreshing to see a company actually acknowledge other companies by name. Match was a little bit of a mess, as these multi-men matches tend to be, no matter what company they're in. The one thing that was a little strange about this, you'll get more of this if you listen to the main podcast, but Homicide and Chris Dickinson actually lost the tag team titles the previous night, and while the announcers did mention that, they looked awfully happy for two guys that lost their tag team titles. I thought it was a little odd. The crowd was extremely hot for Tony Deppen. Along with multiple chants, there were people in the audience that were holding printed out signs that said, "Sign Tony Deppen." A little bit of research on Twitter. I'm actually following one or two of the girls that was responsible, apparently, for printing out those signs, handing them out. So that's something to note. There were a couple memorable spots in this. Homicide did a dive outside. I mentioned that because, much like one or two AEW guys, I like when Homicide does the dives because he really has a tendency to lay them in pretty heavy. Walter also locked a double Muda lock onto Homicide and Dickinson. Deppen then hit a double stomp onto Walter. Deppen dropped Moriarty. Dickinson hit a Spicoli driver and pinned Moriarty for the 3 count. Lethal, Rhett Titus, and Tracy Williams would come out after that, and Lethal cut a pretty passionate promo hyping up the future of the Pure division and just talking about champions that aren't in the company anymore as far as the Pure division is concerned, and basically just really hyping it up. Following match was the Briscoes versus Matt Taven and Mike Bennett. Briscoes took advantage of this fairly early on and cut the ring in half and kept it that way for an extended period of time. I don't think I've ever seen a Briscoes match where they didn't immediately start doing that. It's really refreshing, actually, to see some psychology and some scientific tag team wrestling. Matt Taven would eventually end up getting a flurry of offense in, a couple near falls. Saw attempted doomsday devices by both teams, actually, that would end up getting interrupted and countered. Matt Taven at one point hit a moonsault onto the floor, onto his partner, and Jay Briscoe. A little bit of criticism here. I've never understood when people do this, why they don't at least attempt not to hit their partners. It's just a little strange. Mark Briscoe went up top to hit some type of spinning elbow. It's a little hard to describe Mark Briscoe's offense sometimes, especially when he goes up for a high-risk maneuver. Again, if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to go back and watch the show itself so you'll have a better idea as to what it is I'm actually talking about. Immediately afterwards, Mark Briscoe tossed Matt Taven back in the ring. Both Briscoes hit clotheslines, got a 2 count. Eventually, more towards the end, the Briscoes would go outside to grab a chair, set it up for some double team moves. The crowd got pretty noisy at that point. And actually, when the double team spots got shut down, the crowd seemed like they got pretty pissed off, actually. Mark Briscoe would run the ropes and jump off the chair onto Mike Bennett on the outside. Jay went for a driller to Taven. Taven countered it, rolled it up for the 3 count. Matt Taven's shoulders were definitely up in the roll up. I question whether Jay's were down for the full 3 count. Just there, when the referee was counting, there was still some rolling going on. I don't suspect that they will bring that into an angle or anything. It was just something to note. There was a couple weird things like that happened at this pay-per-view. I'll get into the other ones a little bit later. Matt Taven and Mike Bennett would end up picking up a W here, which I was really surprising to me. The Briscoes, ever since they had that cinematic match, the name of it's escaping me. It was a cinematic match. If you guys follow Ring of Honor, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Ever since then, the Briscoes have been on a roll, so it was a little surprising to see them lose here. I was expecting that they would continue to rise up through the ranks and eventually not only get championship match, but win the tag team titles. We had up next the ROH Pure Division Championship, Josh Woods versus Jonathan Gresham. In case, for whatever reason, you're listening to this and you've never seen a Pure match, the rules for a Pure match, at least as far as singles competition, are as follows. Each man is limited to 3 rope breaks. After those 3 rope breaks are exhausted, getting into the ropes to break a pinfall or submission does not count after that. Closed fists are illegal, which is the way it's supposed to be in a regular match as well. But the way they enforce this, you hit 1 closed fist, you get a warning. The second one is a disqualification. 20 count instead of a 10 count. And the Pure Division Championship can change hands on a DQ and a count out. This was a pretty intense match. We would actually see referee Joe Mandak get extremely pissed off in this, which was actually really cool to see. It was nice to see a referee get furious when 2 competitors would not listen to him and then actually do something about it when they wouldn't. I'm looking at you, AEW. WWE has its fair share of issues as well with their referees, but AEW really needs to knock it off with their referees. A lot of them looking clueless, not enforcing the rules, threatening to enforce the rules and disqualify people and never actually doing it. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject that I've ranted on before, and I'm sure I will later too. It's not why we're here, though. So, the match itself, these two, of course, exchanged submission holds back and forth, some of which I can't even begin to name for you. The story here would basically end up being we had 2 men in competition that were so enthralled with trying to beat one another that the rules in some ways went out the window. The biggest issue they would have is they would end up tying up and basically end up wrestling each other into the ropes. The first time it happened, the referee basically just waved it off, saying that they both went into the ropes at the same time. We're not going to get rid of any of their rope breaks. After this continuously happening, eventually the ref started taking rope breaks away for both men. He would end up doing this twice before the major controversy in this match. Jonathan Gresham would end up with a double bridge pin. Referee counted 3. Both men's shoulders were on the mat. I thought it was a little strange that he even counted the 3 when he was counting both men's shoulders. I've always thought that finish was a little strange. But basically, he counts the shoulders. He goes and gets the belt, hands it to Jonathan Gresham. The ref calls it double pin, basically no contest, and the match is supposedly getting thrown out. At that point, Jonathan Gresham got on the mic, said that he wasn't going to tarnish his 12-0 record with a draw, and demanded a restart. A restart that would end up biting him in the ass. At this point, Woods and Gresham traded slaps. Gresham ended up getting an ankle pick and a key lock. Traded offense back and forth for a while. They would end up back in the ropes again at some point, and the ref threw out their other 2 rope breaks. At this point, it's only important to note this because they were both out of rope breaks. So if either one of them would get in the ropes after that, the hold wouldn't be broken. Pinfall wouldn't be broken, which is important to note. Eventually, they would trade ankle locks, and Gresham would have ankle lock, obviously, locked in. Woods would have an ankle lock locked in on Gresham, and Gresham crawled to the ropes. Obviously, again, no rope break. Woods ended up pulling him back into the middle of the ropes, and Gresham, I believe, ended up kicking Woods in the knee to get out of that. Obviously, more traded submission holds that I can't even begin to call. Like I've said, these pure division matches are definitely a treat if you're a fan of mat wrestling, more technical stuff, not so much the high-flying stuff. You need to start paying attention to this pure division. It's pretty insane. You're going to see submission holds that I guarantee you've never seen before. Surprisingly enough, Woods would hit a high angle suplex and get the 3 count, and we have a new ROH Pure Division champion. With as long as Gresham has been as dominant as he's been in this division, it's really surprising to see this. But that is what it is. Oh, important note, after the ref handed the title to Woods, Gresham actually ripped it out of his grasp and then ended up, of course, putting the championship around Woods' waist in a show of respect. Next, 6-man tag team titles. Shane Taylor Promotions versus La Bestie Del Ring, Dragon Lee, and Kenny King. I think I noted this last week on the podcast. Roosh was originally supposed to be in this match, ended up having to have knee surgery in the last week or 2, and his father ended up substituting for him in the match. Speaking of substituting, important note, they announced at the beginning of the match that this was Lucha Rules. I don't know that that is something they had originally advertised. I don't remember seeing it anywhere or hearing about it on a TV show. It could have been something that they announced on maybe week by week. I've been kind of spotty with their internet shows as of late. before the match got started, when the Shane Taylor promotions were coming out and their opponents were already in the ring, Kenny King would ambush Shane Taylor with a chair, and Taylor ended up selling an arm injury of some description. He would end up back in the back, and O'Shea Edwards would take his place. Announcers were quick to bring up the fact that this isn't necessarily a unique situation, and a precedent has basically been set for this sort of thing. Believe they brought up that Kenny Omega had substituted for Hangman Page, and they brought up one or two other examples that I don't have in my notes right this second. Again, lucha style rules, which it almost seemed like Shane Taylor promotions didn't get the memo on this one, because they were constantly tagging in and out and their opponents weren't. This match was a little bit of a mess, like these multi-man matches have a tendency to be. This one I didn't dislike as much as some of the other ones I have seen in the past. The reason being is I felt like there was a story kind of being told in all this chaos, where the Dragon Lee and Kenny King and Rush's father were trying any way they could to get these championships, to get all the gold in their group, in La Faction. I always butcher the rest of that when I try to pronounce it, so I'm not even going to fucking go there. In the end, we would actually see Shane Taylor come back out and blast Kenny King in the face with a chair. Referee was outside, didn't see it. Moses came in and got the 3 count. So the Shane Taylor promotions are still your Ring of Honor 6-man tag titles. I look forward to the day when Danhausen, PCO, and Sledge, assuming they can get along long enough to actually get the shot at the titles that I believe they're supposed to be in line for. It's a little difficult to tell. If you go on ROH's website, they are the 6-man titles are the only things on the website that don't have a ranking system. Next up was one of the big reasons that you probably watched this, the ROH Women's Championship match. Miranda Alizé versus Roxy. Alizé actually went into this match undefeated in ROH with, I believe it was a 7-0 record, and Roxy obviously being a 19-year-old rookie. Crowd was solidly behind Roxy. Alizé refused the code at the beginning, slapping Roxy's hand when she extended it. Not surprising behavior there at all. They traded a lot of offense. Alizé was pretty fast to shut that down and get pretty dominant. The story this match told was definitely the more experienced wrestler versus the rookie, which is what we had. I believe the announcers brought up that Miranda Alizé actually had 5 years experience on Roxy. Alizé ended up getting extremely cocky with the nonchalant pinfall attempts. She ended up hitting a GTS, which I thought was really cool. This is a little difficult to explain, but when she went for the GTS, instead of kneeing Roxy in the face with the knee that you would normally see, basically she lifted her up and her head was on the right side of Alizé's body, but she ended up kneeing her with the left knee. I thought it was really cool. Not the way you typically see that. Alizé still extremely dominant after that. She got a near 2 count with the GTS. Roxy struggled to the corner. Alizé walked over, grabbed her by the face, and said, "I'm going to win, and there's not a damn thing that you can do about it." Alizé would actually end up with the Miranda rights submission locked in at that point. Roxy would get to the ropes eventually. More Alizé extended offense. Alizé hit a dive when Alizé would end up hitting a dive, and when she hit it, she did connect, but it looked to me like she landed both on her face and on one of her knees. Hopefully, she's all right. She didn't look nearly as out of it as Jake Atlas did in one of the previous matches. So, again, hopefully he's okay. When push came to shove, Alizé would get a Miranda right in for a second attempt. Roxy would end up countering, a little bit of back and forth, and Roxy would end up hitting a code red for the 3 count and win the ROH Women's Championship. So, congratulations to her. A little side note, if you listen to the podcast, I've made a few predictions in this tournament, and before this match, I decided to call it for Miranda. Every single time that I called this for someone I thought was going to win, they got bounced. 3 predictions, 3 failures on my part. So, evidently, I'm not very good at predicting ROH women's matches. That brought us to the ROH World Championship match. I want to bring one thing up. This match would have benefited from having a buffer match in it, in my opinion. At the last AEW show, I kind of made fun of the fact that the Big Show and QT were booked for a match. I knew exactly what we were going to see with that. Big Show doing most of his signature spots and getting the win. That's exactly what we saw. When the pay-per-view was presented, I kind of understood why they had that match. They had it in the middle of the CM Punk and the main event, which was actually, if you're going to present a match like that, that's a really good spot to put that in. I know ROH isn't really notorious for having matches like that even on the card, usually, but this would have benefited from something being in this. Obviously, it's the ECW arena. It wasn't horrendously loud in there like it would have been for an ECW show back in the day, but it did seem like the crowd was not as into this as they were the women's championship match. We did get Bandito chants several times, but apart from that, we really didn't get a ton of audience interaction. Excuse me. Can't fucking talk today. This match was Elimination Rules. This match wasn't anything super special. It kind of suffered from the same things that a typical Fatal 4-Way match would suffer from. 2 guys in, 2 guys outside, constantly rotating people in and out. They did curb some of this with the elimination instead of just having it a Fatal 4-Way 1 fall to the finish. The first fall actually took a few minutes to happen, which I thought was really good. Many a times we've seen these type of matches in WWE, and the first fall happens in like 3 or 4 minutes. We did get a lot of Bandito and Flamita stuff at the beginning. Bandito would, I guess you can't even say attempted a dive. Bandito would do a dive onto EC3 and Brody King. He didn't connect with EC3. He did somewhat connect with Brody King, and he ended up overshooting it and landing in a woman's lap and hitting the floor. Flamita would break up a pin attempt by EC3. Flamita would eventually end up bringing a chair into the situation and basically give EC3 a love tap. I actually made fun of it at first, and then EC3 took the chair, shot back, and clocked Flamita with it. At that point, the referee signaled for the bell, and then everything made sense with the love tap. At that point, obviously, EC3 went to the back, and we would actually get a little bit of teaming up between Flamita and Bandito. I have to give them credit, though. Bandito was actually the one to turn on Flamita first before the reverse could happen. That was really cool to see. Brody King would actually end up eliminating Flamita with the All-Seeing Eye finisher, and we would end up with a Brody King and Bandito match, one-on-one. I actually didn't see this coming. I figured that we would end up getting down to Flamita and Bandito. We got some Bandito chants at that point. Again, the Roxy chants from the last match were a lot louder. Bandito would get a shooting star press and only get a 1 count on Brody King. Brody King would get up looking extremely pissed, adrenaline flowing. This is a little bit difficult to call. Bandito would end up basically getting Brody King in, I guess, a sunset flip position and rolling that position around and around and around, and ended up getting in what Ian Riccaboni called a Cassia for the 3 count. It was basically a roll-up type. It was basically a roll-up type pin. The Foundation came out to congratulate Bandito. The Righteous would come out shortly after, and Vincent would stare down the people in the ring as they went off the air. That was your Ring of Honor Death Before Dishonor review. Sorry if it seemed a little bit rushed. There is some personal things that have been going on in the last day or two, unfortunately. Which also brings me to the regular podcast is probably going to end up dropping fairly late on Monday. I haven't actually even recorded it yet, just given the chaotic weekend that I ended up having. All that said, I will get it out. It will come out either late Monday, early Tuesday morning. All that said, this was your review. Might I remind you, go ahead and get on the YouTube channel. Link will be in the description. And go there, comment on the video, enter yourself for a chance to win a signed Samoa Joe NXT card. This has been your review, and I will talk to you guys later.